Have you ever failed miserably as a researcher? Because I have. I have failed miserably. I got to Ohio State several years ago, and when I got here, I had high hopes of progressing in my career as a researcher. My area of investigation was communication between providers and patients surrounding end-of-life decision-making. I had been challenged prior to getting here by my mentors at a previous institution to really focus on researching my questions in an underserved population. And I set out to do this when I got here, but I did not have a research network or a clinical network in which to conduct my research. So I set out on a journey. I was on a mission not only to find research collaborators, but also to find clinicians who would buy into my research idea enough to allow it to enter their clinical environment. And I went from clinic to clinic, and I asked providers and managers and clinic leads if they would be interested in taking my project in as theirs. And it is not that there was not interest and that there was not enthusiasm. However, I was having a really difficult time finding a clinical setting where I had buy-in at every level, from leadership to the clinical staff, to conduct my projects. This may sound like a simple thing to some of you, but for me, it was disastrous. I was here as an early investigator with my protected time clock ticking very quickly, and I was unable to get any pilot data, to publish, to secure funding, and I stalled. I stalled completely. I didn't know what to do, and I had a question that I needed to ask myself. Do I really continue on this path as a researcher? I was working so hard, I was spinning my wheels, but I didn't have anything to show for it. So I was grappling with this existential question of, do I continue as a researcher or do I walk away from it? In addition to being a researcher, I was also a very busy clinician in a busy primary care practice. So it would have been easy for me to say, you know, that research thing, it's not for me. I'm just gonna be a clinician, see my patients, go home, do my charts, and that's my contribution. Thankfully, before I made this decision, I did consult some of my mentors. I remember one night being on the phone with one of my mentors at the University of North Carolina, which is where I came from, and I told him my long story of failure after failure after failure. And he listened to me patiently, and finally, at the end of our conversation, he said, "Seuli, you have to remember, research is a social sport." And I paused, and then I pretended to understand, and I thanked him for his time, and I said goodnight. But that night, I kept thinking, what did he mean by that? What did he mean by the fact that research is a social sport? That just sounds strange. But I realized over the course of the next several days that I had been ignoring my biggest asset, my colleagues and my personal clinical site. You see, I practiced, as I mentioned, in a busy primary care office that cared for thousands of patients. I was surrounded every day by physician colleagues who cared for me, both personally and professionally, staff who did the same, and just quality people who had fabulous input about a whole host of different things. So I decided to put that piece of advice to work, and I repurposed my project, and I made it fit in my clinical environment. And the results were massive success. We were able to complete a pilot project, get data, publish, get local funding, and then secure national funding, all out of this project that I was ready to scrap and walk away from. I stopped and I asked myself, why? Why all this success? Just like my failures had snowballed, my successes had snowballed. I had not changed at all. what had changed was my clinical environment, my ecosystem. I had not necessarily a recruitment site, but I had staff and colleagues as part of my research team standing with me and beside me and giving me feedback about the inside track of why a patient declined to consent for my study, what scheduling issues we were having, what recruitment issues we were having, and everyone was committed to help me succeed. And they gave me feedback and they supported me and they helped my study succeed. I was so fortunate. I had a team I could go to when I was ready to throw in the towel. Even though I was so thankful for my success, I was left asking myself, what about all the other researchers? What about all the other researchers who are trying to make this journey, don't have an environment, and walk away? And I thought, this should not happen at The Ohio State University. I had a wonderful opportunity to share my experiences with the CCTS. I had several discussions with Becky Jackson and Kim Toussaint, who are passionate about removing barriers to research for researchers so that they can translate their research into practice. And we talked about the goals of researchers. We are a big university with lots of ideas. Even though researchers who are trying to translate their science into the practice setting have a vast array of ideas, they have the same goals. They're trying to publish, they're trying to get funding, they are trying to get progress to move their field forward. So we have this commonality. We also have a commonality in our barriers. We have visible barriers, barriers that we write into our research proposals, but we also have invisible barriers that we can't see. For me, when I started, my invisible barrier was not being able to see how a social network could actually lead to research success. And as an investigator, when you are trying to make this goal against these defenders, it is a scary proposition, and you feel all alone, just like I did. However, when you have a team of people behind you, like I was fortunate enough to have, the whole process becomes much less intimidating, much more successful, and actually really fun. So in our series of discussions, we tried to figure out how can we prevent this from happening at Ohio State? How can we make sure that researchers have access to the clinical sites that they need? And that is where the Pragmatic Clinical Trials Network was born. The Pragmatic Clinical Trials Network is a research network dedicated to making sure that researchers have access to clinical sites in which to conduct their work. And I am so excited to tell you about what the Pragmatic Clinical Trials Network is. As I mentioned, it is a research network that is built around the general internal medicine practices. We have 6 primary care sites, over 45,000 patients, 45 clinicians who are also investigators. We have nurses, clinical pharmacists, social workers, and fabulous support staff. In addition to the personnel wearing several types of different glasses, we have a breadth of variety. We have physicians who are certified lactation counselors, pediatricians, general internists, geriatricians, and our patient population is just as varied. And for that reason, we can serve to meet the needs of researchers in a wide array of networks and research arenas. So you may be asking yourself, how does this work? How can I benefit from the Pragmatic Clinical Trials Network? So we have formally been open for about 1 month now. And over the course of this fabulous month, I have had the privilege of working with 5 different investigators from 5 different colleges across the university. And each investigator needed something different. I want to provide you with an example of how we helped one of these particular investigators. I had somebody come to me from one of our colleges who was a very established researcher with a track record of funding and publication. And she came to us because she was applying for a large NIH grant. And I will qualify this with, I'm going to be purposely vague right now. She wanted to get her grant off the ground. She had all these pieces in place, but the missing piece was a clinical project around which to anchor her proposal. And when she came to us, she said, I need access. I need access to the clinical environment, and not any clinical environment, but a specific clinical environment where I can do this type of research. And she threw out several ideas, and she said, I'm struggling with trying to find something that's clinically relevant and innovative. And through our several meetings with her, we were not only able to say, hey, these 2 clinics would be the best ones for you to work in. We were also able to collaboratively brainstorm as clinicians a clinically relevant, innovative project that took her grant from non-existent to very innovative. And furthermore, we were also able to do the hard, invisible work of social networking. She came to us as a stranger, and she left as a friend with a team of 6 clinicians who were passionate about her work and rooting for her and wanting her to succeed. And isn't that what we want for all of us? So you may not need exactly what this particular researcher needed. But the beauty of our network is that we are not only big, but we are also individualized. We will meet with you not just once, but several times to get a sense of not only your project, but also your short-term needs and your long-term needs. And we can tailor our services to you to meet you at the inception of your study, but also even if you're in the final year of an R01. And we really want to help you. So in summary, research is indeed a social sport. It should not be done in isolation. And honestly, I would say it's actually dangerous when it is done in isolation. We work and live at a large institution where we should not be alone. We developed the Pragmatic Clinical Trials Network specifically so you do not have to do your research alone. We want to be part of your team. And our recruitment season for researchers, their projects, and their patients and participants is always open, just like our doors. We have a jersey with your name on it, and we look forward to seeing you on the playing field. Thank you so much.